Surprise, surprise. Your eyes do not deceive you. It is I, Matty Ice, here in this beautiful Cancun, as you can see, my humble abode in the background. I am here on my honeymoon, and I'm here to be on the show. So I'm happy to be back with my wonderful hosts here. You can't tell already, we got Smoking Gator himself, David Street.
What's up, everybody?
We got Mr. Texas Ed, Horns Up.
Hook 'em, y'all.
And me, myself, Matty Ice. It is awesome to be back, guys. It may just be for today's episode. It could be for the next couple. But I have been blessed to be on this wonderful honeymoon with my new bride. And here I am, at least for an episode today. So we had a very eventful weekend, college football. I mean, that's without being said. Every weekend in college football is eventful to me. I don't even care if the Ducks are on a bye. I'm still enjoying college football. But the Ducks were not on a bye this week. We did face Washington State after we had just faced a very tough, competitive Washington team. And, you know, a lot of people said it. This could be a trap game for Oregon. Washington State, I mean, they've got a great team. And I don't take any game lightly. I don't care if we're playing Stanford, we're playing Cal, we're playing Washington, Utah, or Washington State. So for me, I wasn't taking it lightly, and nor should the Ducks. And they didn't. We did end up winning the game 38-24, but it started out slow. After the first quarter, it was only 3-3. So I think it didn't start out maybe exactly how we wanted, but I'll take a 3-3 game going into the second quarter all day. At least we're not being blown out. So in my opinion, you're looking at a 0-0 ball game going into the second quarter, and I think that we were able to execute how we can be as a team. Bo Nix ended up in the game with 293 yards. Isn't big numbers, but that's okay. That's what this Oregon Ducks team has been doing this entire season. Is they're not throwing up big numbers individually as far as Bo Nix goes, but as a team, we are. So we do lead the nation actually with 553 yards average a game. So I mean, I'll take that, but at the same time, I want to see my defense firing on all cylinders as well. And earlier this year, that's what Oregon was being called. It was a very well-balanced team offensively and defensively. And this last two games kind of showed maybe a little bit where we're heading, in what direction. I don't want to say it's our true colors just yet because we still have the rest of the season. But I will say our offense continues to show who we are. And I think our rushing attack is what led the game from the beginning to the end. Bucky Irving, Jordan James combined with 232 yards on the ground. And I love that. The fact that we could have both our running backs putting up combined that type of numbers to me is a well game plan. So I'll take that any day. And Bucky Irving, not just on the ground with 129 yards rushing, he did catch 3 passes for 51 yards and a touchdown there also. So our offense looked great. Our defense, I'm still a little worried about, especially if you watch the game before the half ended. Washington State didn't even have the ball with, I want to say, not even a minute left, and they were able to drive all the way down. Luckily, we didn't give up a touchdown, but we did give up a field goal. So seeing that does worry me. So I think that's something that we need to work on. Our offense is doing great per usual, but we need to keep that going on to the next couple of games. So as far as Oregon against Washington State goes, that's about all I have right now. But I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Texas Ed himself, who's going to cover this Texas game over the weekend and hopefully give us an update on Quinn Ewers and see how he's doing.
I appreciate it, Matty. And once again, congratulations. And congratulations to my Longhorns for coming out of this weekend with the win. It was quite the tale of several different stories that happened all at once for the Longhorns. And it really started quick. It showed just how dominant Texas can be against an inferior opponent over the first quarter. We ended the first quarter 21-0, clicking on all cylinders. We were just boat racing them. And by the end of the half, Houston had gotten some momentum. They came in. Donovan Smith, he's not afraid of the Longhorns. He's beat them before when he was at Texas Tech last year. So he brought them back to, actually tie the game in the first drive of the third quarter. Now, with as dominant as Texas can be on offense, some of the habits of all gas, no brakes reared its ugly head. Steve Sarkisian did decide to go for a fake field goal in the second quarter, and it just really kick-started that momentum for Houston as that quarter went on through the third. So Houston got to 21 all, and you could see Texas get a little bit, tighten up a little bit because they were in front. They were dominating this game, but yet Houston just kept getting into it. And then eventually, as Texas is fighting through this, yes, Quinn Ewers did go down with a shoulder sprain that Steve Sarkisian said in his press conference today is week to week. However, some reports are coming out that it's going to be somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks before he's back. So that is going to lead to Malik Murphy. As of today, he would be the starter, with Arch Manning being his backup. Now, everybody's been talking about this whole transition to Arch Manning. Malik Murphy is one of the forgotten guys in it, but his play and his athleticism is not going to let him be forgotten as we go forward into the rest of Big 12 play. So it is going to be a great, conversation. It'll be a great practice week. It'll be a great competition, which is what the Texas Longhorn football wants to have, is they want to have competition at all levels to get who is going to give us the best chance to win going forward, waiting for Quinn Ewers to be 100%, hopefully by the end of the season, going into postseason play, whether that be the Big 12 championship game, whether that be a bowl game, whether that be a college football playoff. So we're really looking forward to that portion of it. When it comes to Malik Murphy, he is a big, strong, natural passer of the ball. So we feel very confident in him. And we all know the prodigal grandson, Arch Manning. So, there's a lot to look forward to, even with Quinn Ewers out, because every position on that field for the Texas Longhorns, it looks bigger, faster, stronger than their opposition through the rest of this Big 12 schedule.
Yeah, I don't think it's time to necessarily hit the fire alarm yet, because Texas does have the pieces already there in place, and I'll compare them similar to a Utah team. You have a Utah team that is going to be without their starting quarterback the whole year, but they are still playing great football. Granted, they went into the season with that information for the most part, whereas Texas is now in the middle of the season. But Texas still has the pieces. They are dynamite both on offense and defense, even though the quarterback is the general. He's the leader. It's not going to be as hard of a transition as I think America is trying to make it seem, or the media, I should say. You as a Longhorn fan, you're telling it straight right now exactly how it can be, because who's coming in now to play quarterback and what he brings to the table. So I don't think Texas is going to hurt necessarily. They will a little, because Quinn Ewers is a great quarterback, but I think that they didn't lose their whole team. They only lost one player right now, and I think that's important to look at.
Not to mention that Jonathan Brooks is one of the top 10 rushers in the entire country. He gets severely overlooked for the depth and the breadth of the passing game.
Yeah, AD Mitchell, I feel like, has really stepped up the last couple weeks, because the first several weeks you weren't seeing it because maybe things weren't clicking, but he has amazing potential coming from Georgia. And if you've looked at these Georgia receivers over the last couple years, they're bringing them in. So the fact that he came from there to Texas, but the last several weeks has been living up to that potential. So they've got two-headed monsters out there, in my opinion, out on the receiving board. So Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you didn't know, Florida did not have a game this week. However, though, you always got your eyes on another team. And I know for a fact Smoking Gator and Florida Gator fans had their eyes on a team, another orange team in particular, and maybe a little crimson. You want to go ahead and tell the folks here what you were looking at this last weekend?
Yes, absolutely. It is true that that we did not play this weekend. Although during the weekend we did get a commitment from major five-star defensive lineman LJ McCray. So some would say that we're actually 6-2 now on the season, which I'm not going to argue against. But yes, just because my team's not playing doesn't mean that I am not watching college football. And yeah, the game that I was mostly focused on Saturday was the game between Tennessee and Alabama. Of course, we all know what happened last year. Tennessee beat Alabama for the first time in 10,000 years. And so that was a big win for them. And then, obviously we know that Alabama got their revenge. And that game was truly a tale of two halves, gentlemen, because the first half, Tennessee had dominated Alabama. But then in the second half, Tennessee dominated, or Alabama dominated Tennessee in the second half. I've been seeing a lot of Tennessee fans on Twitter blame the refs. And don't get me wrong, Alabama definitely got away with some calls there. But at the end of the day, Tennessee fans, the refs did not lose you that game. Your coaching is what lost you that game. Particularly just taking the ball out of Joe Milton's hands more so in the second half, because in the first half he was 16 of 22 passing and had 2 touchdowns and no interceptions. So 16 of 22 passing in the first half. But then in the second half, he was 12 of 19. So he had less pass attempts in the second half than he did in the first half. And I understand the, making adjustments, but there is also obviously the idea to not fix something if it ain't broke. And Joe Milton was slicing and dicing Alabama's secondary. And so I don't know why Tennessee's coaches just abandoned that. Now, I know you're going to hear that and you're going to think, well, 19 pass attempts isn't all that much smaller than 22 passing attempts. And that is true, okay, if you're a box score merchant. But the truth is that Joe Milton was throwing more towards the end of the game when the game was already out of reach, when it was so obvious that Alabama was going to win. So just coaching overall was for Tennessee was just terrible in the second half. But even beyond the passing too, Tennessee had 133 rushing yards, but they also had 38 carries. So when you have that many carries, of course, you're going to have a lot of rushing yards. And so that averaged to only 3.5 yards per carry. And they didn't get any rushing touchdowns. So I don't understand why Tennessee kept running it against Alabama when clearly it wasn't working for them. But enough about the losing team. Let's talk about Alabama. Jalen Milroe had 220 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick on a very efficient 14 of 21 passing. And guys, Jalen Milroe has been getting better as the season has been going on. And same thing with Alabama too. Like when you look at Alabama and the wins that they've racked up, I think you'll notice that Alabama hasn't really been dominating opponents. In fact, I think they only have one, maybe 2 wins this season by at least 20 points. But what they are doing is they're playing that vintage style Alabama football, just suffocating their opponents and just using their defense to win games in the end, which is what we're used to seeing from Alabama usually, which is why I call it Alabama style football, and that is how they've won their championships before. So big win from Alabama, and like I said, Tennessee. I know the refs definitely missed some calls, but your coaching in the second half was just pathetic. Like, I'm sorry, it was.
Yeah, I know I'm not going to get much bias when I ask this question for you too, but who's the real UT?
Oh, I'm gonna let Ed answer that. I think because I know he's gonna say it right away.
Of course, I'm going to say the University of Texas. In fact, as the story goes, from the volunteer army, Davy Crockett left Tennessee to come to the Superior State, Texas, and fight for the independence and the spirit of what Texas is. So we're going to take it. University of Texas. We're the real UT.
Well, hey, listen, while Texas fans like you, Ed, are obviously going to say that University of Texas is the real UT, Tennessee fans are going to say that Tennessee is the real UT. But you know what the real UT is? The University of Tampa, school in my hometown.
Perfect
I thought
responses.
I thought you were going to go with University of Toledo.
Yeah, no, those are perfect responses. No bias whatsoever, but I felt like I had to ask that question. But we'll talk a little bit more actually right now about the Tennessee Bama game. Tennessee came out and they were dominating that game, and Alabama looked washed up. It looked like how everyone predicted the season was going to go for Alabama. Keep in mind, they still have predicted that Nick Saban's going to lose 3 games this year. Very well still can happen, but don't ever underestimate Nick Saban or this Alabama team. And I will say this, Jalen Milroe has come very far this season from being, I'll say, a scrub pretty much to then the next game being, well, let's have a little quarterback competition in a live game. I mean, I guess we couldn't do that on the practice field, but and then to being named the starting quarterback again, and he's proven right why they should have chose him. And like you said, David, the Tennessee play calling in that second half was just absurd. I mean, they lost that game themselves. I made a joke actually at halftime. We're in the same group chat where someone's like, well, Nick Saban's gonna have to go to the drawing board for this second half. What's gonna be his game plan? I made a joke saying, well, he's gonna pay the refs, duh. But the second half came and you saw a completely different and new Alabama team. And that's always been the story of Alabama. Nick Saban has his team in check. If you came out in that first half and you look like trash like they did, you better believe that second half, you're going to see a completely different team. And that's what happened. And not only that, but Joe Milton, every time I watch him there, especially when he's outside of the pocket, he's like a deer in the headlights. He does not know how to play. Once he's outside that tackle box, he just doesn't know how to play quarterback anymore. So, fortunately for that Tennessee team, as long as he's quarterback, I wouldn't have that high expectations. But that's just my opinion of what I saw in the game. But don't ever count out Alabama. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll leave one more thought, and then I'll hand it over to Ed. I mentioned on the show before that personally, I don't think Milton has been bad per se, but he also hasn't been great. Like he's been average at best. Which, when you compare that to what Tennessee had last year when they had Hendon Hooker, is no doubt a massive disappointment. I don't think he's been bad, but he also hasn't been that great either. What do you think, Ed?
Well, when it comes to Joe Milton, because they started out so quickly in that game, I'll start with him. He dropped an absolute dot in the corner of the end zone on that first drive. And that was an amazing throw. But those throws have been so few and far between. It's the reason why he is who he is. Now, he's threw better than what I had expected of him. I expected balls to be 5-10 yards out of place. They weren't that way. They were just a little bit off. He was still able to run the offense. But remember what I said last week, Tennessee's play calling has shrunk down as the year has gone on, and Alabama's play calling has expanded as the year has gone on with Jalen Milroe. And you saw this happen, especially in the second half. One of the biggest things that people overlook in Nick Saban's coaching dominance is his in-game adjustments. Those adjustments that he can make at halftime can really take away the best option for his opposing team, in this case, Tennessee, not the real UT. And, and kind of put them on their heels a little bit while those adjustments on offense, going back to Milroe, Milroe didn't throw that much in this game, but he threw effectively and he threw it far enough down the field to loosen up the coverage so he didn't have as much coming back on him, during those run options, during those design QB runs, which I think he's better at than RPO. But overall, I think that was where it was won and lost, is that expansive Alabama play calling versus Tennessee kind of clamming up as things got tough. Those are things that you saw play out right in front of you. And just on a side note, officiating was terrible all over college football this weekend. There wasn't a game I turned on this entire weekend that did not have at least 2 to 3 calls where you're like, what is happening? That needs to be called or that doesn't need to be called. And I could go on and on about it, but I won't. I will leave it to that. Officiating, yes, people have complaints about it, but in the end, your players have to play, and that's who won. Alabama's players played.
Yeah. My favorite saying that I will always say, no matter the sport, is play well enough and never leave it in the judges, the umpires, the referees' hands. If you play good enough to the point of that, you won't ever need to use that as an excuse. But when it comes to bad officiating, it's easy to point fingers and to say, what if, shoulda, coulda, woulda. I get that. I've played sports and I know exactly what that's like. But play well enough and never leave it in their hands. But I want to touch a little bit more on what you said, and you put it perfectly when it came to Jalen Milroe's passing plays. He played a perfect game, and as well as the coordinator itself calling it. He didn't have to play explosive, and I'm actually this is great because David's going to like this one too. But a stat came out yesterday, maybe today, of so far in the season completion percentage in the nation, and Bo Nix, Oregon's quarterback, actually leads the nation with a 78.4 completion percentage, and actually right behind him, but in third, is Graham Mertz for the Florida Gators at 76.2%. But I want to talk more than just those numbers there. People could say, well, that's a loaded stat. They throw screen passes or the check downs and all of that. You're absolutely right. If you watch an Oregon game or a Florida game, you are going to see a lot of that. But you're going to see smart play calls. You don't always have to be explosive. Look at Oregon. They have the number one offense, if you're talking about yards, in the whole nation. But you're not going to see explosive play after explosive play as far as the passing game goes. You're going to see smart playing. And that's one thing that I'll say. If you look at that list, you're going to see the names of Carson Beck. You're going to see J.J. McCarthy. You're going to see Bo Nix and Graham Mertz. And you're going to see, what do they all have in common right now is they have a successful offensive game going. I know Florida's not there yet, but I am putting him in that category because he is playing smart. And all of those quarterbacks are playing smart, but you aren't going to see explosive plays. So, but they're all winning games. And even though Florida's not there, Carson Beck with Georgia, J.J. McCarthy with Michigan, and Bo Nix with Oregon, they're all in the top 10 of the rankings right now because their teams are winning and they're playing smart and they have little to none interception turnover ratio. So I want to point that out because that's exactly what you were talking about with Alabama's play calling, especially in that second half, is you didn't see anything explosive, but you did see completion percentage, accuracy, and plays that matter that ended up winning the game for them, especially their defense did help out also. So I'm glad you brought that up, but I also wanted to turn it over to that. But how are you feeling about that, David, as far as seeing Graham Mertz in that category?
Oh, man. Well, after all the trash that Graham Mertz was getting all off season, man, like there was nobody even considered the possibility that this guy would even be a decent quarterback. So it is so nice that like so many people are eating crow right now, especially especially all the Wisconsin fans who are like, oh, thanks for taking our trash. Yeah, well, guess what? Your new quarterback is even worse. So turns out maybe it was the system. That's been trash here. But yeah, Matty, you're exactly right. Graham Mertz's completion percentage is a little misleading because for the most part he has been throwing screens, dinks and dunks. But although it should be noted that in the game against South Carolina, he threw more deep balls in that game than pretty much any other Florida game this year combined, which I don't think was a coincidence after the old head ball coach, Steve Spurrier, had expressed a desire to see Graham Mertz throw more deep balls. Now, personally, I think part of the reason why we did that and why we were able to do that is because South Carolina's defense is terrible. So we were able to do it against a defense like that. I don't think we're going to be able to do that against Georgia. I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of went back to our old style of play calling. But with Graham Mertz, he's got only 2 interceptions, but literally both of those interceptions were tipped off the receiver's hands. And actually, it's, Pro Football Focus had a stat saying that Graham Mertz only has 1 turnover worthy play. And people were like, but he's got 2 interceptions. Like, do you guys really not know? Do you not know what turnover worthy means? Like, are you being serious right now? You actually don't know what that means. It clearly means that there's only been one turnover that was his fault, or rather that there was a play that should have been a turnover that was Graham Mertz's fault. But listen, at the end of the day, you can't argue against 12 touchdowns against 2 interceptions on I think like 76% passing. And also what's great about Mertz performing well this season is that I'm assuming he comes back next year. He is eligible to come back next year. And the assumption is that he's got a year in his belt under our offensive system and he'll be even better next year, like Joe Burrow. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that Graham Mertz is going to take a Joe Burrow leap, but let's not forget that Joe Burrow, his first year with LSU, wasn't that great. Okay. In fact, it really wasn't until their bowl game against UCF, if I remember correctly, that people started to notice, hey, you know what? I think there's something about this Joe Burrow kid, because in the regular season, he left a lot to be desired. But then against UCF, he had a great game, and then he carried that momentum over into the next year. And we all know what happened the next year when LSU assembled arguably the greatest college football team of all time. So I'm not saying that Mertz is going to take a Burrow leap, but I don't think it's crazy to expect improvement next year. And what's also especially great is that our crown jewel for our 2024 class, DJ Lagway, we don't need to worry about throwing him into the fire. He can come in, redshirt. Graham Mertz can take him under his wing. Lagway can learn under Mertz. And then once he has that year on the bench, then Lagway can come in and start to go off. So our quarterback situation at UF right now is looking really, really good. And I know Florida fans could not be happier right now.
I have a question for both of you gentlemen. So all 3 of us, our schools, have something in common. Our starting quarterbacks are from the transfer portal. If you are an athletic director for your school, what is your priority? Transfer portal or the recruiting trail from high school? I know that this could be a topic that can go on and on and on, but you are seeing the transfer portal grow like no tomorrow. And all these quarterbacks, even some that I have mentioned being the top quarterbacks in the nation right now, Michael Penix, Jaden Daniels, all transfer portal. But yes, they were all heavily recruited too at one point for their original schools. So what would you prioritize right now, especially going into next year, where I know for Texas it's going to be a little different because going into the SEC, it's almost been a given that this is Arch Manning time. Viewership, it's going to be our first year, and many other things. But what would you prioritize from this point on? I'll start with you, Ed.
Well, I tend to look at the transfer portal kind of like baseball teams look at free agency. Uh, you know, with baseball teams in free agency, those that can afford the high end prospects, they will go get them from those smaller market teams and put them in their system and plug and play. You know, one thing that you had mentioned, Matty, is the transfer quarterbacks, but was not mentioned uh, in the out of the transfer portal being in his first season at the new school. You know, Bo Nix is in his second season. Quinn Ewers is in his second season. Michael Penix Jr. in his second season. Caleb Williams in his second season. You know, so there is something to be said to getting those quarterbacks into the right system and letting them grow into that system and having a second season to really have them show out where they want to be. Now, recruiting is always going to be important, but when you're talking about plugging players in at areas of need, it's very much like, you know, college football free agency. So it's got to be a mixture of the two. You're not going to be able to just buy a team and get out there and win ball games. You've got to be able to develop within your own ranks, but be able to fill in those areas of need with players of the caliber that you need to fill them in.
I agree 100%. And I'm glad you brought up that point as far as second years go. The reason why I asked this question is you are seeing, I'll bring Oregon up for an example, is we had Ty Thompson, who I could be wrong, but I want to say it was a 5-star recruit quarterback. And he's still with us, which I love the loyalty. But since he came, we've had transfers. Anthony Brown was our first one, and then Bo Nix, and Bo Nix is in his second year. It's like, and he's continued to sit back there, originally redshirted to now being second string or even third string at first. So it's like people get tired of that and they want to go elsewhere, and that's where people come. You got that claw machine where they just go and grab them, and that's what's happening throughout the whole country right now. Is you're getting these big market teams, exactly like you said, coming and getting these quarterbacks from low market teams where it's like, hey, come over here, we're a lot bigger. And like you use that example of the MLB where there's no luck, I mean there's no cap, but you have to pay the luxury tax. But with college football, it's, well, we got a bigger market. Just come here, we'll make things work. I promise you. And you're seeing that with all these second year players at their new school. Hence, well, Caleb Williams, I mean, Lincoln Riley, it's almost as if, they went together, but it's working out for many quarterbacks. But how are you feeling about that, David? What would you choose? Would you choose that transfer portal or recruiting?
This is a very easy answer for me. I mean, I am always going to prioritize recruiting over the transfer portal. Now, don't get me wrong, the transfer portal definitely does have its use, but to me, I look at the transfer portal as helping you fill out an area of need, an area of weakness, but it should not be what you use to build your roster. Like if we look at teams that have won that win college national that win national championships in college football, it is usually teams that stack up top 3, top 5 recruiting classes. Heck, look at the team that won back to back national championship, a talent acquisition business. Now, college football is also an ever-changing landscape. So, would I be surprised if sometime in the near future the transfer portal does get prioritized more than recruiting? No, I would not be surprised. But as of right now, I think you have to like it is recruiting to me, as I said before, is more important than than the transfer portal.
There was no right or wrong answer there when I asked the question, but that's exactly kind of what I was looking for was your response, David, because if you look at history as of right now, the teams that have been heavily recruiting, like Georgia, is winning championships. And I'm sure that I mean, we don't know what's going to happen this year. For all we know, Washington could win it, and then it'll be kind of the point is, well, look, they got Michael Penix in the transfer portal. We don't know what's going to happen yet this year. It's still halfway through the year, but teams that heavily recruit are winning championships. And right now, when people talk about the transfer portal and the quarterbacks that are doing amazing, that are in the top five right now in Heisman rankings of people's personal opinions, it's more so talking about that. Granted, their teams, though, are in the college football playoff contention right now of the likes of Washington, Oregon, Texas, USC. I mean, maybe not so much a USC right now, but they all have that in common. So, but I'm glad that you answered the question like that because it's true. Right now, history shows teams that recruit well are winning championships. So, but this
Right.
season's still young.
And I do want to add one more point, if you don't mind. So personally, when it comes to the transfer portal, I don't think you should be allowed to transfer out of your original school for the first couple of years, because I think you made a commitment to your original school and you should honor that commitment. And unfortunately, commitment is a lost art these days. It seems like nobody believes in it anymore. It's like, the first sign of adversity, like, I'm just gonna, like, go somewhere else. I'm not willing to put in the work here. Okay, which I think is just very sad. But also, realistically speaking, it is also true that there just comes a point where you've tried everything you could and unfortunately just didn't work out for you. And I get that, okay? The way that I see it is you made a commitment, honor it, stick through it for at least 2 years, and then by your third year, which is your draft eligible year, if it doesn't work out, then I completely support you transferring out, because your third year, you're draft eligible, and especially like if you're projected to be, if you have a high ceiling when it comes to being a draft pick, and it just is not going to work out at your original school, and you see yourself at another school where your talent is going to be put more in place, and you want to go there to increase your draft stock, I totally support that. But like I said, at least honor your commitment for your first couple of years. And if it doesn't work out after that, then go transfer wherever you want. That's my take on that.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, this is a topic of discussion that could go on and on for a while. We all have our opinions about it, and we also have kind of facts of what's happened, such as even before all this started, Oregon had a recruit who's now the UCLA starting quarterback, Dante Moore. He was just a recruit. He did not transfer. He was just a recruit. But once he saw the direction UCLA was heading before the season started, because they were going to the Big Ten, he pulled his commitment and went there. So these young men are treating it as business decisions, because what's going to get their name higher and higher on viewership and eventually the draft board. I like your proposal, David. I don't know if it's ever going to get to that point. I think this is something that the NCAA as a whole is going to have to, I'll say, investigate. I say that as more of like a term of studying how this transfer portal goes over the next couple years, because it's only getting bigger and bigger. And thanks to Dion, he's now made that such a big spotlight that you're going to see a lot of people entering that. I mean, they always have been on this transfer portal for a while now, but now more and more. So we could talk about this more and more, but for now, I just wanted to leave it at that with that question. Is there anything else you want to add, Ed, before we wrap this up?
There is a point that I wanted to add into the transfer portal talk, and it has to do with the NIL that's involved with it. Because in the end, part of the transferring that you're seeing of these recruits is they are getting offers of NIL money to go to these other schools, Well, in such as the case of Caleb Williams, and that's going to be a one-off situation, but there's talk of him not playing the rest of the year because he's not going to meet the goals that his NIL contracts were expecting him to hit so he can go to the NFL. That is a whole can of worms that we don't have time for on this show, but it is something that does need to be, as you said, studied and investigated over the next few seasons, how that NIL will work with the schools and the recruits, coming together in some form of agreement.
Yeah, I agree. It works hand in hand in this situation when it comes to now NIL and the transfer portal. So it may be a topic up for discussion, hopefully on our next episode, or even maybe one of those that carries over several episodes because it could be talked about for a while. But in the end, there's nothing us as fans right now can do because it's still so new to the NCAA, and I think they're still having to work out these kinks. There's going to be a lot of negatives that have to happen in order to make it a right. So even when it's a right, not everyone's going to agree. You can't please everyone. So that's the first order of business. Don't act like you're going to please everyone because you're not. You're never going to please everyone. So, but yes, that is pretty much all that we have today, folks. We appreciate you tuning in. Please hit that like and subscribe. We appreciate your support. Your overpouring of support is making us continue to do this. We love sports, but with your help, it makes us want to do this more and more and more. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and David, start with you first. Please let the audience know where they could find you on socials.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at David_Street17. Again, that is at David_Street17.
And Texas Ed, let the folks know as well.
On Twitter, you can find me at EdSmith7133. Hook 'em.
Awesome. And for me, you can find me on Twitter at Booster Matty Ice. Again, that is on Twitter at Booster Matty Ice. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much today for your show. We've got Texas Ed, we've got Smoking Gator, and for at least now, you got me, Matty Ice. Thank you once again, guys. It's a blessing to be back. Missed y'all. Thank you again. Have a great day.